Hey guys! Here's a new story that'll make you think twice before diving headfirst into a life changing decision. Today's story comes from Ralph White, a 69-year-old American who thought he had found paradise and love in the Philippines in the form of a bar girl. What started as a dream retirement turned into a nightmare filled with nasty fights, frauds, cheating, and lessons learned the hard way. Stick around to find out how Ralph's journey took a turn for the worse. Hey folks, let me tell you a story. My story. I'm Ralph White, a 69-year-old retired bank accountant from America. You know, I thought I had it all figured out. After a lifetime of crunching numbers, working long hours, and making smart investments, I managed to build myself a pretty comfortable nest egg. Unlike most of my old pals, I didn't have to rely on pensions to scrape by. For years, I worked my way up, made connections, and learned how to play the game. I dabbled in investments and side hustles, always thinking ahead. By the time I retired, I could finally take it easy. I didn't need to stress about I didn't need to stress about money, and let me tell you, that's a luxury not everyone gets to enjoy. I've got two sons, both with families of their own, living in different cities. They visit occasionally and we talk on phone, but I don't mind living alone. After losing my wife to cancer 6 years ago, I got used to the quiet. Don't get me wrong, I loved her with all my heart, and not a day goes by that I don't miss her. But I've never been one for chaos. The sound of kids running around and people constantly in your space? Not for me. Still, I couldn't deny that I craved companionship, someone to hold my hand, laugh at my old jokes, and remind me that there was still warmth in this world. I wanted someone to spend my final years with, to make all the grinding I'd done in my life feel worth it. Last summer, one of my sons stopped by for a visit and suggested I try traveling. He'd just come back from a wedding in the Philippines and couldn't stop talking about how beautiful it was, the beaches, the people, the culture. He said it might do me some good to get out of the house, to live a little while At first, I laughed it off. The idea of hopping on a plane and flying halfway across the world at my age? It sounded ridiculous. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I'd spent my whole life working. Why not take a break and see what else was out there? Before I knew it, I had my ticket booked. When I landed in Manila, the first thing that hit me was the sheer energy of the place. The streets were alive, jeepneys weaving through traffic, vendors selling everything from grilled meat skewers to colorful fruits, and people smiling everywhere I looked. It was chaotic, but there was something infectious about it. The nightlife, though, that's what caught me off guard. Bars and clubs were everywhere, lit up with neon signs and blaring music. At first, I just wanted to take a look around to see what all the fuss was about. But the moment I stepped into one of those bars, I understood. The women were absolutely stunning. Sweet smiles and soft voices, and they had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. For a 69-year-old like me, it was intoxicating. I started to let loose a little. I even made friends with a group of retirees who were staying at the same hotel. We decided to explore the city together, and boy, did we dive right in. One night, someone had the bright idea to rent a yacht for a party. Now, let me tell you, this wasn't cheap. The yacht alone cost about 500,000 pesos, roughly around $8,800,000. But we figured, why not? It's not every day you get to live like kings. The yacht was incredible, decked out with lights, music, and everything you'd expect from a luxury party. And the women, they were the icing on the cake. I paid for their lady drinks, which cost around 500 pesos each, about $9, and even got myself a light cocktail. I wasn't about to get drunk at my age, but I wanted to enjoy the night. These girls knew how to make you feel special. They danced with me, laughed at my stories, and even fed me little bites of food. For a moment, I forgot all about my age, my responsibilities, everything. I felt alive again. But the morning after, that was a rude awakening. When I woke up, the girls were already leaving the yacht, waving goodbye like nothing had happened. It wasn't until I started getting ready to leave that I realized something was wrong. My wallet is gone. All the cash I had brought with me, completely wiped out. Thankfully, I hadn't brought my credit cards with me to the yacht. If I had, I would have been in a much worse situation. I was furious. I complained to the yacht staff, but all they did was shrug and tell me I should have been more careful. By the time I reported it, the girls were long gone. At that point, I was ready to pack up and head back to the US. But when I tried to book an earlier flight, there were no seats available. For some reason, flights were completely booked, and I was stuck in the Philippines for another week. Looking back, I wish I'd left when I had the chance, because it was during that cursed extra week that I met her, the woman who turned my life upside down. I couldn't shake off the frustration from the yacht fiasco, losing my wallet and watching those girls waltz off with my money like it was a game. It got to me. Even the plush hotel bed and luxurious spa treatments couldn't calm my mind. I kept thinking, how could I be so stupid? At my age, I should have known better. For days, I stayed holed up in my hotel, trying to distract myself with room service and TV. But it didn't work. The anger and embarrassment stuck to me like a bad rash. Finally, I decided to do something about it. I figured a drink might help, and maybe, just maybe, I'd have a better luck this time. The thought crossed my mind that going to another bar in the Philippines was probably the worst idea, but there I was anyway. I walked in, found a quiet corner, and ordered a light drink. My mood was sour and my expectations were lower than ever. Not long after I sat down, a young woman approached me. She was dolled up like most of the girls there. Tight dress, heavy makeup, and heels so high I wondered how she could even walk. Well, she introduced herself, but I wasn't in the mood to talk. I politely excused myself, offering her some money for her time. She frowned, clearly insulted, but eventually left. Then I heard it, a sweet, melodic voice cutting through the chatter and music. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just another girl trying to lure in customers. But then, the sound of clapping drew my attention. Then, I heard it, a sweet, melodic voice cutting through the chatter and music. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was just another girl trying to lure in customers. But then, the sound of clapping drew my attention. I looked up and saw her. She had her back to the crowd, standing on the stage under the swirling disco lights. Her hair was tied in playful pigtails, and she wore a short red and white dress that hugged her figure. She swayed to the music, her voice carrying the kind of energy that could wake up the dead. The whole bar came alive. Men threw money at her feet, clapping and cheering like she was a rock star. She sang a lively tune, her voice as sweet as honey, and danced like she didn't have a care in the world. I sat there, transfixed. There was something about her, something magnetic. I finished my drink as she wrapped up her performance, bowing gracefully like she just won a Grammy. The applause was deafening. Men whistled and hooted, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I felt an overwhelming urge to protect her. When the crowd settled, I got up and walked toward the stage. She turned to me, her eyes meeting mine for a moment before she glanced away, a small smile tugging at her lips. Then she looked back, and her gazes locked again. She was stunning. Her beauty was natural, yet there was a sadness in her eyes that tugged at something deep inside of me. When I asked for her name, her sweet smile was disarming. She introduced herself as Mia, and at that moment, I believed the innocence in her demeanor. Looking back, I realized she probably saw dollar signs in my eyes rather than honesty. I helped her down from the stage. Her touch was delicate, almost cautious. Before we could talk further, she gestured toward a table and excused herself to speak with a man still waiting for her. I sat back, watching and waiting while she charmed them effortlessly. I watched as she walked over to the group of men who had been throwing money at her. They smiled at her creepily, showering her with compliments and singing her praises. She played her part perfectly, laughing and nodding, but her body language said she was just going through the motions. When she finally returned to me, she had the same warm smile she'd worn on the stage. Mia sat down across from me and did what most bar girls do. She made me feel like I'm the most important man in the room. She asked me about my life, my family, my work. I told her about my years as a bank accountant, my investments, and even the yacht incident. She listened intently, her eyes widening when I mentioned the theft. She told me to be more careful, warning me that scams were common here, not just from women, but from men too. She told me to always watch my back. When I asked about her life, her playful demeanor faded. She told me she'd been working in bars since she was 18. Her father had abandoned her, and her mother died, leaving her to fend for herself. With no education and no family support, she had no choice but to turn to this line of work. Her voice cracked as she called her father a coward, and for a moment I saw the vulnerable girl behind the confident act. She wiped away a tear, but not before I handed her a tissue. I tried my best to console her. I refused to talk to any of the other bar girls that night. My focus was entirely on Mia. We ordered drinks, and I paid her bar fine without hesitation. The more we talked, the more I felt a connection I hadn't experienced since my wife passed. Mia had a way of making me forget the world around us. That first night, as the bar closed, Mia thanked me in a way that felt personal. She said that kind men rarely set foot in places like this, and her words stayed with me, replaying in my mind long after I returned to my hotel room. Before I went back to my hotel, she asked me when I was leaving the Philippines. When I told her it would be later that week, she smiled and asked if I'd come back to see her before I left. I nodded, unable to say no. As I walked back to my room, I couldn't stop thinking about her. For the first time in years, a woman had made me feel something more than loneliness. I wanted to take her away from the darkness of her world and make her the light of mine. It became like a ritual, like a moth drawn to a flame. I'd sit in the same corner, nursing a drink, waiting for her to finish her stage performance so she could sit with me, and every night she gave me her best attention. The other girls in the bar served their clients like clockwork, fitting between tables and keeping their eyes on the next paycheck. But Mia? She'd take away time from her rounds to talk to me, to listen to my stories and share her own. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic. I'd started calling her my darling Mia, and she didn't shy away from it. She began to see a future for herself beyond the smoky bar and neon lights. She told me she dreamed of escaping this life, running away with me to the coast, getting married, and starting a family. She wanted several children, all of them with my features. She imagined them looking like me, and her sweet words lingered in my mind long after we parted each night. We'd sit for hours, holding hands and talking about the life we could build together. She called me her man, and sometimes even playfully baby boo, as ridiculous as that might sound coming from a 19-year-old to a man my age. But I didn't care. Her touch, her words, they made me feel alive again. To the other staff and customers, it was a bizarre sight. Here I was, an old man, being doted on by a young, beautiful woman in a bar full of younger, wealthier men. The staff whispered behind our backs, and the other patrons stared, confused and, I'm sure, jealous. But none of that mattered to me. On the last night before my flight back to America, I found Mia in tears. She was sitting at the edge of the bar, trying to keep her sobs quiet. I rushed to her side, asking her what was wrong. At first, she wouldn't tell me, but after some coaxing, she finally spilled everything. The other bar girls had turned against her. They were jealous of the attention I was giving her, of the connection we shared. They had complained to the boss, accusing her of planning to scam me and run away with my money. Mia was devastated. She thought these women were her friends, but now they were threatening to beat her and even kill her. The boss wasn't any better. He'd told her she'd lose her job if she kept seeing me. Without her job, she said, she'd be out on the streets, sleeping among beggars with no way to pay her rent. I could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't just upset, she was terrified. She begged me to take her away, crying uncontrollably. She said she had no one else to turn to, that she'd die like a street dog if I left her behind. I tried to calm her down, telling her I'd figure something out, but she wouldn't listen. I decided to talk to the boss myself. I walked up to his office, determined to sort this out. But the moment I mentioned Mia, he waved me off like I was wasting his time. He told me to leave and warned me that if I didn't, he'd call the police. I didn't back down. I told him to let Mia live in peace and keep her job, but he refused. He claimed she was scamming customers and said he'd throw her out of the bar if I didn't stop interfering. But the boss wasn't budging. He said that Mia was like his property and couldn't leave without his permission. Seeing no other way, I made an offer, a price for Mia's freedom. It wasn't a small sum. I offered him 500,000 pesos, roughly $8,800,000. His eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought he didn't believe me. Skeptically, he asked me to transfer the money to him. I took out my phone and started the transaction. When he saw the confirmation, his greed overtook him. He agreed. Mia was free. That night, Mia hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her face. She kissed me and thanked me over and over again. For the first time since we met, she wasn't Mia the bar girl. She was just Mia, mine. I left her with a large sum of money to hold her over until I could arrange for her paperwork and bring her to America. It was the least I could do for the woman who made me believe in love again. The next morning, I boarded my flight with a heavy heart. I was leaving behind a part of myself, but I told myself it was for the best. Mia's life of darkness was over, and I couldn't wait to make her the light of mine. I'd left her with more than enough money to last her for a few months, but I couldn't stop worrying. I'd already planned to return soon. If her paperwork dragged on longer than expected, I'd just hop on a flight next month to see her again. I couldn't stand the idea of being apart for too long. When my sons visited and asked me about my trip, I decided to share the news about Mia. I was expecting smiles, maybe even a pat on the back for finding love again. Instead, they were stunned. They couldn't believe I had fallen for someone I met in a bar in the Philippines. They started talking about bar girls, scams, and how men like me were often targets. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My sons were calling my darling Mia a sweet, beautiful, hardworking girl, a scammer. I fought back, calling them names in return. How dare they speak about her like that? They didn't know her like I did. I told them they were all wrong, that Mia wasn't like the others. She wasn't after my money. She was after a better life for us. I refused to listen to their advice, dismissed their opinions entirely, and stormed out of the conversation. Meanwhile, Mia and I were closer than ever. At 69 years old, I didn't have much work to keep me busy, so I had all the time in the world to give her my attention. We'd FaceTime daily. She'd tell me how she was doing, share little updates about her day, and thank me endlessly for saving her from her old life. But one thing threw me off. She told me she was planning to enroll in college. This confused me. The plan was to get married and live together in the US, but enrolling in college meant she'd be staying in the Philippines. When I asked her about it, she explained how much she loved her country. She said she'd grown up there and couldn't imagine leaving behind entirely. Mia had a way of persuading me that made everything sound logical, even when it wasn't. She explained how much she loved the Philippines and how attached she was to the place where she grew up. She painted a picture of a peaceful life by the beach, convincing me that moving there would be good for me too. I resisted at first, but eventually, she wore me down. Her reasoning made sense, or at least I convinced myself it did. I abandoned the paperwork for her move to the US and started planning my return trip to the Philippines instead. My sons begged me not to make the move. They told me it would end in disaster, that Mia was manipulating me. But I didn't listen. I told myself they just didn't want another woman replacing their mother or getting a share of their inheritance. And to be honest, Mia had planted that seed in my mind. She'd once told me that my sons probably thought that she was after their inheritance. She laughed as she said it, but the idea lingered in my thoughts, feeding into the narrative I was starting to build in my mind. And to be honest, Mia had planted that seed in my mind. She'd once told me that my sons probably thought that she was after their inheritance. She laughed as she said it, but the idea lingered in my thoughts, feeding into the narrative I was starting to build in my mind. By the time I boarded my flight, I had completely cut ties with my son. In my mind, they were selfish and blinded by their greed. They didn't understand what Mia and I had. When I landed in the Philippines, Mia and I had a simple court marriage. Neither of us had family present. Her parents were gone, and my sons were out of the picture. It was just us. We celebrated privately with champagne, roses, and a night that made me feel 30 years younger. In those moments, I forget all about my age, my aches, and my worries. But here's the thing about old age. When you get even a small taste of youth again, it's dangerous. It makes you reckless. Mia enrolled in college as planned, and within 3 years, she gave me two beautiful children. Each pregnancy was expensive. She demanded the best doctors, the best food, and constant pampering. She refused to do any house chores, saying it wasn't good for her health or the baby. We hired nannies and servants, and even her college studies were done at home with private tutors. The fees were sky high, but I didn't complain. I was happy. After the second child, I told Mia I wanted more children. I'd always dreamed of having a big family, but she refused. She said she needed to focus on her studies and her business ideas and that her figure would be ruined if she had more kids. I was disappointed, but I didn't push her. Instead, I let her take control of our finances. She insisted on dividing the inheritance for our children right away, saying my sons might try to play games with it if something had happened to me. And like a fool, I did as she said. During those years, I completely cut off contact with my sons. Mia kept me so occupied that I didn't even think about them. Every decision revolved around her and the family we were building. After Mia graduated from college, she started a small clothing business under my name. It did well, which made me think she didn't need as much financial support anymore. I decided to reduce her monthly allowance from 200,000 pesos, which is $3,500, to 100,000 pesos, which is $1,750,000. When Mia found out, she was furious. She accused me of treating her like a burden and questioned whether I was spending money on another woman. Her words stung, and I was stunned to see this side of her. I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't hear it. To keep the peace, I apologized and reinstated the original amount. I told myself she was just being childish, that it was her way of showing how much she cared about me. Everything seemed normal again. But then my investments started failing. Companies I'd worked with for years refused to renew contracts. They claimed there had been suspicious activities under my name. I couldn't understand it. My reputation had always been spotless, and I hadn't done anything to jeopardize it. Or so I thought. The pieces didn't add up, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I couldn't figure out what was happening. In all my years as a banker, my reputation had always been spotless. I had never ever been once accused of fraud, and yet here I was, cut off from my investments, companies refusing to work with me, and my accounts flagged for suspicious activity. It didn't make sense. No one else handled my finances, not even my sons. I had always managed everything on my own, so who could have access to my accounts? The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. Had someone hacked into my accounts? Was this some kind of elaborate scam? I didn't want to worry Mia, so I kept it all to myself. I told her I had to go back to the US for work, an excuse she barely acknowledged. When I arrived in America, I immediately contacted my bank and financial advisors to get the bottom of it. What I found left me in shock. My accounts had been accessed multiple times from the Philippines by someone who clearly knew my passwords and security details. I never heard of him before, but the transactions went back almost 2 years, right around the time Mia and I got married. And it didn't stop there. More money had been funneled to brothels in the Philippines, routed through a known pimp. The amounts were staggering, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I started to wonder, who was the woman I called my wife? Desperate for answers, I called the bar where Mia used to work. The manager laughed when I mentioned her name. He told me Mia's story about her father abandoning her was a lie she sold to all the customers to gain sympathy. In reality, her father, Alejandro, was very much alive and a known drug dealer and a pimp. Mia had been working for him for years, funneling money through his network. Hearing this was like a punch to the gut. The woman I had loved, the woman I had saved, had been lying to me from the very beginning. I flew back to the Philippines unannounced. I needed to see for myself, to confront Mia and demand the truth. When I arrived at her home, the scene that greeted me shattered what little was left of my heart. Mia was in bed with another man. I couldn't believe it. The maids, the nannies, everyone was busy with their tasks, and there she was, shamelessly betraying me in my own home. When she saw me, she broke into tears, begging for forgiveness. She claimed the man was an ex who had been threatening her, demanding money or else he'd hurt her. She said she hated him and only let him in because she was scared. Despite everything, I forgave her. Her tears broke me down, and I told myself that she was just a victim of her circumstances. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But things didn't get better. They got worse. My finances continued to spiral out of control. The businesses I had built over decades were falling apart, and the monthly expenses in the Philippines were bleeding me dry. When I suggested reducing her allowance, thinking we could cut back from 200,000 pesos, which is $3,500,000, to 100,000 pesos, which is $1,750,000, she exploded. She accused me of treating her like a burden, of being ungrateful for everything she did for her family. She even accused me of having an affair. I was stunned. The sweet, loving me I thought I knew had become someone else entirely. But once again, I gave in. I restored her full allowance and apologized, convincing myself she was just stressed. Meanwhile, Mia's scandals only grew. She spent more and more time away from home, meeting with men from her bar life, college days, and even her supposed exes. When I confronted her, she turned it back on me, saying a young woman like her had needs I couldn't fulfill. Her words cut deep. She called me an old jealous man and threw my belongings out of the house. Mia had everyone on her side, the maids, the nannies, even the guards. She had bribed them with all the big dollars and pesos, and they refused to listen to me. She kept the children from me, and when I tried to fight back, she escalated things further. She filed a restraining order, accusing me of domestic harassment. She even fabricated scars and presented witnesses to back up her claims. She kept the children from me, and when I tried to fight back, she escalated things further. She filed a restraining order, accusing me of domestic harassment. She even fabricated scars and presented witnesses to back up her claims. The court sided with her. I was blacklisted from the country and given a short window to leave. I had no choice but to flee the Philippines, leaving behind everything: my money, my reputation, and the family I thought I had built. I boarded a plane with nothing but the clothes on my back, feeling like the biggest fool in the world. When I returned to the US, my sons welcomed me back with open arms. They didn't say, "I told you so." They didn't rub my mistakes in my face. Instead, they supported me, paid my bills, and helped me rebuild my life. It took months to clear my name. I had to prove I wasn't involved with the fraudulent activities Mia had carried out under my name. Slowly, I began to regain control of my accounts and restore my reputation. But the damage had been done. I had lost everything I worked for, all because I fell for the wrong person. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. Mia played her part perfectly, and I wanted so badly to believe in her that I ignored every red flag. To anyone watching this, let my story be a lesson. Not everyone is evil, and not every experience in the Philippines will end in disaster. But if you're a foreigner, especially an older man, be careful. Don't fall for bar girls. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. And most importantly, don't dive into a culture or lifestyle you know nothing about. Just don't be an emotional fool for these young ladies to play with. What do you think of Raf's tragic story? Do you know someone who's experienced something similar? Feel free to submit similar stories or let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Take care and see you in the next video.